everyone to the Migration Summit 2023. I'm pleased to welcome you to this session, the role of refugee students in localization agenda and leading change in their communities. I'm so pleased to introduce my colleague Arash Bordba, who will lead and moderate this session. Over to you, Arash.
Thank you so much for supporting us. Thanks a lot for the organization and allowing us to all be together here today. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Arash Bordbar. I work with UNHCR Education Section based in Denmark, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator of this session today, and I hope and wish that we will have a very fruitful conversation together and we would be able to learn from one another. As we've heard, the title of this session is the role of refugee students in localization agenda and leading change in their community. And we will hear more about what we actually mean by localization. And when we talk about students, refugee students and others, how they would be able to create change in their communities. This session, as we've heard, is part of the Migration Summit, which is organized by the MIT Refugee Action Hub, NAAML, and Karam Foundation, which is a month-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, and social entrepreneurs. A lot of you potentially have participated in other sessions for the Migration Summit. There are many more that are still happening, and I would encourage all of you to join the rest of the sessions that are taking place for 9 more days. This session in particular will focus a lot on the role that students themselves play and young people in promoting localization agendas. It will highlight the importance of empowering students, both that are refugees, migrants, and host communities, to become more active agents of change through education, through advocacy, and leadership. And this session will really include different expert presentation and discussion with a focus on sharing some positive examples and different strategies that we have heard for supporting refugee students in the effort to create a positive change in the communities. At the beginning of the session, you will hear an introduction of the panelists, so that gives you a bit of background about the work that they do. So you would be able to ask some questions that hopefully we would be able to provide more background information. And they will touch base on some of the work that they are doing as an example on how they're really creating that positive change towards the Sustainable Development Goals. As many of you know, refugee students face unique challenges and barriers in accessing education and employment opportunities. However, many of these students also have immense potential to become active agents of change in their communities. And for us as UNHCR, we know that by investing in their education and leadership development, we can help them to become more empowered to create that positive change that we want to talk about and promote social and economic development and advocate for their own rights. Our aim is to make sure we are raising the level of refugee participation in higher education to 15% by 2030, which is an ambitious but realistic goal. Right now, only 6% of refugees access higher education, compared to more than 40% for non-refugee students. And we want to ensure that more young refugees have that opportunity, the basic human rights as anyone else. So a lot of the work that we do is to find ways to encourage students to basically participate, but also to make sure that we encourage more inclusive classroom, inclusive campuses, diverse campuses in the university and colleges. We are together today to ensure that participation of young people is consistent and meaningful across different spectrum, in particular with reference to process that began with what we call the Global Refugee Forum, and taking stock of progresses that has been made by different stakeholders with a vision towards the future. Refugee participation and youth participation is not only an ethical imperative, but also something that allows young people to bring their own knowledge and experience into policy and dialogue and decision-making, further legitimizing initiatives and approaches that impact their lives, which you will hear today. The global community, as you all may know, has recognized the value of refugee participation, of students' participation, and youth participation in a pivotal events, including different annual events that takes place by United Nations. I think it's enough of me. We are here today with distinguished panelists that have joined from different parts of the world and have different experiences. So let's just begin by hearing a short introduction of who they are, the work that they do, and then we will get into more conversations, deep dive, question and answers. And by the end of the sessions as well, we will have a time so that you would be able to interact with our panelists and ask your questions. So I encourage you to take note and write your questions so that we would be able to come back to them. By the way I see on my screen, maybe we could start with Gentil. Can we pass the floor to you, Gentil, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, as he said, I'm Gentil Dusenge. I'm currently based in Rwanda and I've been in Rwanda since 1996. Like that's when I came out as a refugee. I was 2 and now I am a graduate at Kepler. It's like I'm a graduate from Southern New Hampshire University through Kepler program and I did healthcare management. But currently I am working with education and I'm working at Kepler again as a humanitarian programs administrator, where I am currently focusing on supporting refugee students who want to transition from high schools into universities. So my primary work is about supporting these people to help them get more eligible, help them overcome challenges around refugee applicants, to help them like being enrolled into university programs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gentil. I think we will hear more about some of the work that you do. And I think it would be interesting to know how you have, after accessing some of those opportunities, education, now you're really sharing those skills and knowledge with others. So thanks a lot again for being a part of the panel. Can I hand over to Khatira?
Hi, my name is Khatira. I'm an Afghan refugee living in Karachi, Pakistan. I am a refugee advocate and a member of Refugee Education Council Canada. Being a member of the council, I help advise the government of Canada, and I also advocate for the innovative global policy solution to address the widening gap in education, especially for girls. I'm also a co-founder of Mean Foundation, which is a non-profit, non-government organization founded by me and my sister, who is the founder. In Karachi, we are basically working for the refugee rights and in education, especially we have the consultation classes for all the refugees who cannot get admission and cannot get access to education in Karachi, Pakistan. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Khatira, and welcome. Thanks for giving us the time. I think you also work in a very specific area and a need to ensure that women and girls are particularly have access to education. So it's great to hear more about that later. I would like to pass it over to Dara.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dara. I'm a policy studies student at Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York, in the United States. And I am part of several locally started student-based organizations working on peer-to-peer coaching and empowerment in the Syracuse City School District, which is a very large hub for refugees, working on gaining people skills, technology literacy, financial literacy, and also giving them opportunities to talk to players in the community, like the mayor or the superintendent.
Thanks a lot, Dara. I think also we've spoken. It's quite interesting to see how you have taken a role in supporting the community in a school where you have a lot of the migrants and refugees. So it'll be interesting to hear about that. Next, let's go to Rima.
Hello everyone, my name is Remo and I am a senior psychology student at the American University of Beirut, currently residing in Lebanon. I have a long experience in community service and leadership empowerment for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And I am also a co-founder of Family Forward, which is an initiative that empowers Syrian students residing in Lebanon to learn more about a taboo topic, specifically reproductive health. And aims to normalize this topic among refugee camps in Lebanon.
Thanks, Rema. Thanks for being with us today. And it's quite interesting, and we'll hear more about it. But I guess for a lot of the young people, when you say you're the co-founder, that brings a lot of questions. And I think a lot of young people would like to hear more how you started. So I hope we will be able to get into that as well. Let's go next to Fadi. Fadi, floor is yours.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure being here with you today. So my name is Fadi, I'm a graduating senior psychology student at the American University of Beirut. I'm a recipient of the Middle East Partnership Initiative Tomorrow's Leaders Scholarship, and I have worked extensively in various projects with the refugee community and most of the time targeting education. And I'm another co-founder of the Family Forward Reproductive Health Educational Project.
Great, thanks, Fadi. It would be great to have you as well. Maybe now that you are the last person, we might start with you. And I think I want to ask a question for all of the panelists to kind of set the scene and hear about the challenges that young people, refugee students face in different parts of the world. So if it's okay, if you can give us what are the key challenges that refugee students face in accessing either education or employment opportunities? And how can we overcome some of these challenges that you've seen?
Yes, thank you, Arash. I think this is a very important question that we can address on so many different levels. But I think one of the key issues and that lies at the core is that systematic policy and procedural challenges create many different hurdles for students of refugee backgrounds to access education and other basic services that are deemed human rights. So, for example, in the context I'm familiar with, there are so many no policy policies, which means having very vague policies that are quite common in the Lebanese context regarding Syrian refugees. And I feel this creates a sense of uncertainty and ambiguity because the affairs are not regulated by specific laws, but merely by sparse government decisions that keep constantly changing. So anyone who wants to make any difference in their lives needs to keep up with these complicated policies and decisions. And we can notice in contexts like Lebanon that there are many discriminatory local policies in place against refugees. For example, there are curfews that are forced on only refugees, but no one else, and other limitations of their freedom of movement. There are arbitrary arrests for the slightest misconduct. And in countries like Lebanon, for example, there is the sponsorship or kafala system, which puts the affairs of refugee families in the hands of one particular person who's a national of the country and makes them dependent on this sponsor. And most of the time they end up being exploited by them. So all these issues create systematic challenges to refugees because especially young adolescents and young people are most vulnerable to these conditions because they are trying to navigate in completely new circumstances, but these circumstances are designed to disadvantage them. And particularly for people who are from low socioeconomic status. And this is what we see in displacement conditions. So I think one of the most important solutions is to address these policies and to have transparency and accountability as to what the governments are doing with regard to refugees.
Thanks, Fadi. It's quite interesting. I think you've touched base on a couple of really important issues, right? One is how sometimes the policies is actually putting people in a situation where they won't be able to decide for themselves, so they won't be able to have access. Although sometimes, as you said, the policies are quite complicated. It doesn't say no, it doesn't say yes, and it kind of impacts different people differently. So when you say for youth, especially having so much burden on the shoulder to make sure that they're able to, grow and have access to education, that becomes even harder. So it's interesting to hear from you on that angle. Maybe next, I will hand it over to you, Khatira, if you could tell us what you think young people are facing.
There are some very general challenges that every refugees around the world are facing, but the most important thing, according to me, is like Fadi said, there is lack of collaboration between stakeholders. Like there is lack of collaboration between government, the NGOs working for the refugees, and the education provider. Like the education institution all over Pakistan does not follow the laws and regulations which are set by the NGOs and the government of Pakistan to allow the refugees to get an admission in universities. When you go for an admission in any kind of university, any education institution, they have their own set of regulation. They need particular documentation. They do not identify all those documents which you have from your own country. So that is the problem. I guess there's a lot of communication gap between these stakeholders. So you will go through the language barrier problems and financial problem once you get admission. The problem in here we face is we do not get admission in any education institution because we have different strict laws and policies in getting education. So I believe that the government all the stakeholders, especially government, NGOs, and education institutions should have the common policy or common laws for the refugee rights and refugee education. Apart from education, when I come to employment, still we face a lot of problems. Like I have a very true example of my sister who is working for INGO. For 3 months, she has been working on a contract basis, and they have asked her for NOC. Like most of refugees are being asked for NOC from government organizations or from the NGOs, so that would be approved for the refugees that they can work in Pakistan. The problem here we face that if you go for government organization, if you ask them from where should we get the NOC, they will tell you the different name of organization. You should go there. You should go there. Once you contact one organization, they said, "Oh no, it's not our work. You should go and ask this organization." So there is no particular policy that which organization should the refugees contact for the NOCs and all the work-related problems. And once you get to the proper organization that, oh yeah, this organization is going to help you, the second problem you face is you are not going to find the specific person who is going to help you. Everyone will keep telling you, contact this person, contact that person. So this is the problem that I think that stakeholders should come in a single page, in a common page, to make proper policies for the refugees. This is the place which you should go. This is the policy that you should follow, and all the education institution and working organizations should be informed that these should be notified the policies and the laws that have been set for the refugees.
Thanks, Khatira. I can also see that we get a lot of thumbs up. It is true. I think what sense of what you're saying is that mostly access to information, access to adequate and accurate information is quite hard, right? You hear different answers from different institutions, especially when you're in the need of legal documentation or access. So it makes it even more complex to know how you would be able to have access to employment or education. Especially for youth, I think for students, it's harder that you have to keep following up and you get into that constant limbo. But great, thanks, Khatira. And I hear more collaboration and direct participation of different institutions. Maybe we will turn over to Dara. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think as far the largest challenge that I've seen as sort of an outside perspective of someone who is not a refugee but works with them quite often is the ability to access quality education. So it's been statistically proven that refugees are more likely to be in school districts that have less funding, that have teachers with less experience, that have less access to technology, all of these things. And I've worked in the inner city schools here in Syracuse for many years. And one of the first classes I ever taught, just 2 of my students had been born in the US, and none of them had computers and none of them knew how to type. As 12th graders, so they were about to graduate high school, not knowing how to type. And of course, if you don't know how to type, that makes applying to college incredibly difficult. That makes finding a job and applying to a job and getting that job incredibly difficult. And so what it really came down to was making sure that these students had the tools that they needed, sort of capacity building them, to get the skills that they needed to succeed out in the world beyond education, or if they wanted to go to college, sort of mentoring them on how to get there. Just because even in Syracuse, if you look at a map of the school districts and you look at a map of refugee, like where they live, the schools with the highest condensation of refugees often have the least funding and the least resources. So often these students are getting a subpar education and graduating with very low reading levels, very low technology skills, things that you really do need if you want to go to college or you want to get a job. And so I think the greatest thing that we can do is give them the skills and the tools that they need, and then let them run, because most of these students have amazing ideas about how to improve their communities, but they just don't have the tools to get in front of the right people or to figure out exactly how to do that. And so my job has been sort of getting them on the stage, handing them the tools that they need, and sort of doing whatever I can to make sure that their voices are heard in the community.
Thanks, Tara. Two very interesting one again. I think quality education, when we say access to education, it is very important that it's not just any education. I think Khatira also mentioned that, right? It's quite important that you know what you receive because you invest your time and you invest your energy, that you receive something that you would be able to help. And sometimes those soft skills that we take for granted is not something that is given to you because of the circumstances that you have had. So that's also another interesting thing. Maybe we'll come to you, Rima. I know you're also in Lebanon, but it would be interesting to see what challenges, in addition to what Fadi has seen, and if you have been able to overcome them or help somebody overcome.
Thank you, Arash. I also want to follow up to what Fadi said. So I believe away from discrimination on the macro or governmental level, stemming from unjust policies, there also exists interpersonal prejudice on the individual level that also limits refugee students' education in Lebanon. For example, discrimination between home students and refugee students from both teachers, but also students themselves, have made the journey to excel in academics much harder for refugee students in Lebanon. Speaking from a personal experience, I know many colleagues and friends who had to twist and mask their Syrian accent in schools to avoid any form of unfair treatment. I also know others who decided to drop out of school or work because of bullying and discrimination. So I think apart from financial constraints, the trauma and mental health of these students who had to go through displacement journeys present a vital factor that also shouldn't be overlooked. I think to overcome these factors, there should be greater focus on raising awareness on the instances of discrimination and prejudice these refugees face on a daily basis. There should also be greater research and literature focused on post-war psychological trauma that incorporates refugee students' background, norms, and culture in a way to kind of provide them the support necessary for them to excel, and taking into consideration the stigma and the cultural norms that they grew up with in the Syrian and Lebanese culture here. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Rima. That's super interesting. And I guess for a lot of the young people or different cultures, focusing or seeking support on mental health is not really common. So to be able to really talk about it or actually push for it and to be able to bring your peers into making sure that they do receive, or actually they know that there are supports and services out there that can help them is quite important. Let's go to you, Gentil.
All right, thanks so much. I think I will just be talking about what should be done because my colleagues have been like tackling like a lot of things about the challenges. So my point number one would be a holistic or student-centered approach because I realized that it's not about education that we really need when it comes to like talking about education because refugees just going to school is not enough because like there are a lot of inclusion policies, but to be honest, at some point at the end of the day, you realize it's all about tokenism. It's not practical. It's like people are only doing this for symbolic purpose, but it doesn't really work. For example, I can remember like speaking from my personal experience when I was going to university in 2012. I was like one of the brilliant students. I went to school, and 1 year later, there was a policy around schools to provide documentation that were only going to be obtained by nationals. So nobody knew there were refugee students. Nobody was like, how about refugee students who are in this program? So I started hiding and I didn't even get my diploma. So that's why I rejoined another university 5 years later. That's how I went to Kepler. 5 years later, I wasted my time at that university. I didn't get my degree because I wasn't classified. And yet people would say that refugees are enrolled into university programs. So that's one. Again, I want to come back to the quality education. Like, again, speaking from my context, a lot of refugees are only studying in in a box where there is no exchange between them and the outside world. For example, refugees living in camps, they are going to school taught by refugee teachers who never get any professional training. They don't get any professional any capacity strengthening trainings, and they are expected to deliver, and students do the same national examinations. So this is going to affect refugee applicants at the job market because they are not competent. They're not going to make it because they didn't get any quality education, and they're not even aware of the world outside the refugee camp. For example, like speaking of refugees in Rwanda who have been here for like 27 years, living in a refugee camp, and you are expected to get a job, a normal job as a national who just goes all around the country. Another point that I want to highlight is we cannot overlook fundings of education, of refugee education, because you cannot choose an option because you are not going to afford it. It's like refugees are going to just choose options which are easy for them to go to. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again, Gentil. There are so many points, and I don't want to take the whole time. We're supposed to be moderating. I think it's quite important to mention that one point you said about siloing refugee students from other students. It is really, really important that we make sure that they have access to the same curriculum, they have access to the same classroom. And we've been really pushing for making sure there are inclusive policies that refugee students can study and can access the same opportunities as nationals. And I think that really makes it easier for you to have access to job market, to have access to different opportunities as others, or even create one. So really interesting point, and I think we will hear more about it. But I think we've heard a lot about the challenges. I hope that we were able to set the context for you, but let's get into some positive aspects of the work that all of you are part of. And I would like to start with the question on what are some examples of successful initiative that have supported refugee students in becoming leaders and also change agents in their communities. And I might start with Rima and Fadi, both of you, since you have been working on the same initiative. If you can share a little bit on that as well.
Recently witnessed many successful initiatives in this regard. For example, the Center for Civic Engagement at the American University of Beirut has started several projects that aim at refugee student empowerment and education. One notable and creative example is what they call Ghata schools, and Ghata is the Arabic word for cover. And these schools are specially designed and portable multifunctional units that can be assembled by the refugee community close to their areas of stay. And these units are utilized to provide quality education, vocational training, and sometimes trauma-informed medical and mental health services. And I think the projects like this that take into consideration the geographic specificities of the area where refugees are residing are very important, because this sometimes gets forgotten about, because you create a space to bring quality education and specially designed services to the refugee community, of course, with the help of the members of the community itself. I have personally worked on an educational project called Padalea that operated in these small schools for many years, and it provided educational support to those individuals whose education got disrupted, and prepared them for higher education, for applications to universities, taught them the basic skills that otherwise are forgotten about, like the use of computers and being able to type and to research opportunities for themselves, so that they can work towards the betterment of their own life. And I think there are several lessons that can be considered from such projects, mainly understanding and taking into consideration the nuances of refugees' communities' needs and logistics, like to trauma-informed and culturally sensitive practices, and engaging members of the community itself to lead the efforts that aim at bettering their lives. So based on these valuable lessons, most recently a group of colleagues and myself have developed a project we called Family Forward, and it provides a series of modules covering topics that introduce young adolescents to the benefits and methods and access points of family planning. So, of course, these modules are specially designed with cultural specificities and age considerations in mind. And we believe that knowledge and education are the empowerment tools for young youth.
So I also want to expand on what Fadi said. Our project Family Forward introduced earlier. So our primary goal in this initiative is to educate refugees on topics such as safe reproductive health that are considered a taboo among many refugee families in Lebanon. We aim to support the development of refugee leaders that are brave enough to fight reproductive health stigma with knowledge and facts. So the reason we decided to focus on this topic is the alarming statistics showcasing the number of Syrian refugees in Lebanon that are not well versed with reproductive and sexual health. For example, there's an estimated 1 million registered Syrian refugees living in Lebanon, half of which are females, and almost 30% are girls under 18 living in poverty. And also they face illiteracy when it comes to reproductive health. So as it is the case in many other contexts affected by conflict and forced displacement, Syrian refugees, women and adolescent girls are highly vulnerable to negative sexual and reproductive health outcomes. So recent studies of adolescent girls in Lebanon, as well as the data collected from our refugee camp trip to Enbiqa in an area in Lebanon, have highlighted the limited knowledge of sexual and reproductive health topics, including contraception, among this population, which is very alarming. There are also other factors such as the high costs, insufficient services, and also the fear of discrimination that have all been identified as obstacles that also hinders the reproductive health literacy among this population segment. So to fill this gap, we have identified and conducted one-on-one needs assessment with 27 refugee students in Bekaa area in Lebanon, only to find out that 83% of these students were actually not familiar with family planning or simply considered this topic as a taboo. So our initiative Family Forward aims to limit the discomfort of young students when it comes to sexual health concepts, and that is necessary for the delivery of the awareness program we aim to complete in the camp. So through the successful completion of this reproductive health modules we aim to implement through a school-based awareness program, adolescents will be able to develop a comprehensive understanding of the physiological, psychological, but also the economical aspects of family planning. Apart from Family Forward, I'm also very proud to highlight another two amazing programs, which I believe directly empower refugees, which are JSUR and the International Students Overcoming War Initiatives at Wilfrid Laurier University, that not only support refugee students in becoming leaders and change makers in their communities, but have also supported me personally as a displaced female Syrian scholar in completing a master's degree in Canada in the upcoming fall. So through their efforts in providing scholarships and quality education to outstanding Syrian women, these programs are a leading example of initiatives in my region that empower displaced Syrian women to not only excel academically, but also pursue a leadership and community service activities that nurture students' empathy, courage, and resilience to ultimately serve as global change agents.
Thanks, Rima, and thanks, Fadi. All these, I think, examples that you've shared are quite interesting. And maybe I'll just go off track a little bit and ask you, Rima, now that you're mentioning, I think it's interesting that you mentioned ISO. We had a very recent conference with them and it was quite successful to talk about how students can actually lead. So I wanted to ask you something that we didn't plan, but what did it take for you to take those initiatives and be part of the change that you see is needed in your community? We all know, for example, the sexual reproductive health and rights are so important. So you've seen it and you've taken the initiative. What would be your advice for some of the students on this call to try to tackle some of these issues that you see on a daily basis and you take charge?
Thank you, Ara. So I think my advice would be go out to these communities, reach out to these children, try to help as much as possible, no matter how small or simple you think you're helping. It might mean the world to another child or student or even an adult who is in need of your help. Always try to learn more about the circumstances these students and adolescents are going through. Try to share your knowledge, whatever you will learn with them. Dedicate certain hours per week of your time in order to give back to the community, to other parts of the world. So I believe just dedicating some time, managing your time, and being motivated to be a change, not only in your personal level, not even in your community, but in others' community, in other parts of the world, would be, I think, the most powerful advice I can give to the audience today.
Sorry, I think I lost internet for a second. Thanks a lot, Rima. Much appreciated, and sorry for that second question. I think it's quite interesting to hear how you get to where you are, and it's quite inspiring. Let's hear from Dara. Over to you.
Yeah, I think two of the most successful initiatives I've been involved in. First is what we call the Skills Win program. And that's a peer-to-peer mentoring program where Syracuse University students go into the high schools and teach them all kinds of things, from how to type, how to create a resume, how to budget your money, how people skills, practicing interviews, all of these things. And students at the very end of the course can earn what we call an employability certificate that they can put on their resumes, that they can talk about in job interviews. Sort of says they have all these skills, like they learned Excel, they learned Word, they learned Outlook, all of these things that could either help them get into college or help them get a job. And that's been immensely successful. We've expanded into 2 high schools now. We're involved in the nonprofits in the area, and we've actually just expanded into a police cadet program where if refugee students are interested in becoming police cadets, they can sort of take practice classes, learn the trade, and at the end they get a job with the police force. So it's been such a joy to be involved in that, and also just get to meet a lot of students as a college student. A lot of them have questions for me about what it's like, how to apply, how to get in, all those things. And it's been so special to get to share my experiences with them. And it's always such a huge celebration when one does get into college and lets me know. The other program that I've been a part of is a citizenship class, where essentially high school seniors spend the entire year finding a problem in their own community and proposing a solution to it. And at the very end of the semester, they pitch it. We bring in all kinds of people from the mayor, the superintendent, principal of the school, just a lot of different important people in the community that could sort of actually help them make it happen. They pitch it, everybody listens. Sometimes the solutions are actually implemented in the community, which is really, really cool, just because it's so important, especially when we're making policies that affect refugee students, to ensure that their voices are heard in the creation of those policies, and ensure that if it's not their own idea, that they've been consulted and they've sort of helped edit that. So those are the 2 biggest things I'm involved in Syracuse, and both of them have been so very rewarding.
Dara, I might ask you the same question again as well. How did you get involved? I know you were also talking about, this kind of changing the path forward after your studies, maybe. So it would be interesting to hear how did you get into the social impact of part of your day-to-day work as well?
Yeah, so I actually always wanted to be a teacher until very recently. And so I thought what I was going to do was graduate college, work at a high school teaching social studies. And so I ended up going into some of the schools in the area where my university is and teaching classes. And like I talked about earlier, one of the first things I said was, okay, type up your papers. And when I realized none of them knew how to type, we sort of had to all take a couple steps backwards and start at square one and play typing games and sort of learn how to type. And none of them had computers, so we had to rent out these very old, slow computers in a library computer lab. And in general, I was just incredibly frustrated that, they weren't given these resources from the get-go. There are school districts probably 15 minutes away from the one that I taught in, where students all have computers starting in 5th grade. And so by the time they graduate high school, of course they know how to type. They're incredibly sufficient in Excel and Word and Outlook. They probably all have resumes, and they probably have a much better understanding of how to apply to college and what that system looks like. And so I realized that, first of all, these students were graduating high school without a lot of the skills that they needed to actually be successful in the community. And that sort of turned into this mentorship program. And because I had so many connections in the school from teaching, turned into that citizenship class. So it was sort of being the right person there at the right time. And I think that a lot of the students really appreciated. The librarian said that a lot of the students would come in during their lunch periods, free periods, before after school, and practice typing because they were so excited that someone had sort of finally given them the chance that they deserved. And that sort of made me shift from wanting to be a teacher to moving into the policy world and trying to do something on a larger scale across many schools.
Thanks, Tara. Very interesting. Let's hear from Gentil. I think Gentil, also you've mentioned a little bit about how you've gone into Kepler, but let's hear some of the exciting initiatives that you have been part of or you've seen. Yeah.
Yes, I think something that I want to talk about is like it's similar to what Dara was talking about. It's all about being the right person and feeling concerned. So I think the first step should be taken by refugees because they have this pressure of giving back. So for us who have been invested into a lot, I feel like we really have something in common to take the lead. Refugees should be like at the forefront, like to be able to give back. And like it's hard, to be honest. I would start with advocacy around partnering with governments because you might be willing to do something really good, but as long as the government doesn't support you, as long as the local stakeholders are not willing to support you, then you won't go far. So advocacy around partnering with the government is really key. But for myself, some of the initiatives I've been involved in are like before coming to work at Kepler, like when I was a student at Kepler, I was studying from the refugee camp where I grew up. So I was teaching English as second language to my community at the library, where I had like 90 students, and my oldest student was 75 years old, and my youngest one was like 13, 14. So I realized there are people who are willing to do things, but they are limited by their background. They don't know how to express themselves in English. They would like to go to work for maybe a driving license, but they don't know how to. So my English session was like, we had like English part, but we also have social part and also some soft skills part where we elected like people according to what they know to do best. Like for example, we could have like some cooking classes, some interview tips, some resume writing tips, and we had to choose the right person to teach that lesson according to what they really are good at. So for me, I was like, my 3 years at Kepler was all about studying, but also giving back to the community. And again, I would say I'm proud of my work at one of the organizations that worked in that camp called Prison Fellowship, Rwanda, where it was like a faith-based organization and it was about community protection, and they wanted to keep paying incentives to university graduates. So I was a fresh graduate before coming to Kigali, before joining UNHCR and before joining Kepler. I was like, how comes you are a faith-based organization and you are going to pay me 25 USD after a month working with you? And you said you are going to protect this community. How am I supposed to protect my community while I'm even not able to protect my own family with the work that I do here? So it was a lot of work there, and they ended up increasing the payment. That was the very first time for an organization to pay like a kind of normal salary to a refugee working from the camp. So for me, it was all about trying new things, trying and and again it was all about like the pressure of giving back, because I realized if I don't do this, then there's no one else who is going to do that. So in summary, those are the two things that I'm really proud of.
Thanks, Chantil. And I think you've also already talked about how you got involved and what made you to really decide that it's time for you to take charge and bring the change, right? So it's quite interesting how now you have been quite successful in impacting a lot more of your peers with the work that you do also with the Connected Learning Crisis Consortium. Let's go to Khatira.
Okay, so the very positive initiative that I have seen out here in Pakistan is the Dafi scholarship, which has been a really good impact on refugees. But the problem that I have seen, and still we are seeing that there is Dafi scholarship, but there are no Dafi scholars. There are no refugees applying for the Dafi scholarship. This is one of the main problems that I guess we are facing here, and also that the organization Inspire Pakistan, who is in charge of distributing Dafi scholarship in Pakistan, contacted me like this 2-3 years ago when I was, I guess, the very first Dafi scholar from Karachi. They contacted me regarding asking me that why is it that there are no refugee girls applying for this scholarship? Why we are not seeing any refugee girls? Because there are more than 100 scholarships, but only 2 or 3 students are applying. Then I started this initiative with my sister that we are going to give consultation classes for the refugee students, because we have refugee students who are studying, but they are not aware of the scholarship. They're not aware of the scholarship are being announced, and they do not know how to fill the form and how to send those forms to the other city, because the organization that is providing the scholarship is based in another city and we are living in another city. So we have to send all your documents and the fill form in an envelope, tied in envelope, and send them through TCS or some other courier service. So these are the processes that most of the refugees are unaware of, but they are still in students who are studying. So we have started our own consultation classes, which were only based in our home. Like the students were used to come in our home, we used to give them consultation classes on individual basis. Then we decided that okay, we should have a proper, a proper room or a proper, kind of office that should be a place where all the students can come and contact us. So then we founded our own foundation, which is by the name of Amil Foundation, which is founded by me and my sister, based in Karachi. It is located in the refugee area. Now located in the refugee area. So that is where we provide not only the educational consultation classes, we also have some of the refugees facing problem in opening bank accounts, which is very crucial for employment, to getting job in Pakistan. If you do not have bank account, you're not able to get any employment, any job. So that is also a problem. Like I have said in my advert statement, that government have notified all the banks that you can open account for refugees, but still banks are not opening accounts for the refugees. Then you need to have a person bringing all those documents, that notification from the government, and showing them that this is the notification by the government and you have to open the account for the refugees. So this is the kind of work that we are doing. And apart from educational work and employment work, what we are seeing the problem for refugees in here is accessing healthcare. It is one of the, I guess, the worst problems that we are facing. We have a lot of refugees in Pakistan, and we have also Afghans coming in Pakistan basically for the purpose of healthcare. So they not have information how to get admission to the hospitals, how to get proper healthcare. We have also started this initiative that we are going to give them information which hospitals are providing proper healthcare for only refugees. So these are the kind of work that me and my sister are doing. Once I went out from the refugee camp, when I was living in refugee camp, I was not aware of that much problem that refugees are facing, because I was living in the refugee camp, so I was not aware outside refugee camp. Once I came out of refugee camp and went to admission for in universities, going for employment, and I got to know that all this is the kind of problem that every refugee is facing, and we should not solve these problem on just individual basis. If I'm facing the problem, I should go and solve the problem for myself. We should have a proper solution which is for every refugee. I'm facing a problem in getting employment because I do not have a bank account. So I will contact this particular stakeholder, then I have the solution. I have opened my bank account. So what about the other refugees? What will happen to them? Because we have so many people who do not have that potential in going to different organizations and then get a solution. So we have to have a proper channel, a platform where these different students or different refugees can come. They're basically a kind of union where a union is going to solve the problem for all the other refugees. So we are working that kind of a union, like a union.
Thanks, Khatira. It's interesting. Again, I think you talked about how you got into this field of taking charge of the challenges that you face, but not only what you face, you've realized that is something that many others are facing. So it might be also interesting to know how you've gone from seeing those issues into tackling them. I know you're also a member of Refugee Education Council for Canada. So it's interesting to see how you're taking your perspective now into advising a government in policies that they're making to support education for refugees. Let's move into the next topic, if that's okay. We will have one more question, and then I can already see people are starting to ask questions in the chat. But let's start with you, Dara. How can we better integrate refugee students into local communities and support their efforts to promote localization agendas and also sustainable development?
Yeah, I think much of it is about sort of putting the tools that they need in their hands. And I think a lot of times when policy decisions are made, often the target group that the policy affects is not consulted. And that's the same with refugee students. When we're talking about education policy or just resettlement policy, a lot of times very few, if none, actual refugees are sort of in on that decision-making process. And so I think the most important thing we can do is, find those players and get those refugee students in front of them and sort of take refugee students' ideas because they are the best people to ask about, how to improve education for refugee students. They've been the one that's experienced that whole thing. Sort of how to create the path for them to get out and to get their ideas out in front of important people, but also into the community. Because a lot of times it's not the problem that these students don't have ideas. It's just that they don't know who to talk to, how to formally propose them, how to implement them. And those are things that we can assist with, and sort of things that we can kind of raise those students up on our shoulders with procedures that we can build out for them. So I think a lot of it is just amplifying voices and ensuring that they have the tools that they need, and that people listen to their ideas and take them seriously. I think also it's really hard, trying to pitch anything as a student. A lot of people sort of disqualify you right away because, maybe you don't have a PhD or you haven't worked in the government for however many years. But in reality, students are probably the best people to ask. And I think it's also about changing the way we view experts and who really is an expert when we're talking about education policy. Is it people that haven't been in schools for many years, or is it people that sort of live that every single day?
That was very, very, I think, straight to the heart of the issue. Right? When we talk about the best way to tackle some of these policy challenges is to really make sure that people that are impacted by those policies have a say and participate. And I think it's taking a while to shy away from that idea of years of experience and comparing that with expertise. So when it comes with lived experience, I think the people that have lived through those experiences are the experts in their own life. So thanks, Dara. I think that was a very important aspect of making sure that people who are experiencing participate in those policy discussions. Let's hear from Rima. What do you think, Rima? How can we better integrate refugees into local communities?
When it comes to me, I am a firm advocate of the belief that in order to better integrate refugee students into local communities, there should exist dynamic collaborations between individuals in direct contact with refugees, along with national and international stakeholders, ranging from the schools or the organizations supporting this population segment. So I think to promote a long-lasting and sustainable result, we should work on nurturing refugee students' motivation to be changing agents in their communities, through providing them with post-war mental health resources, but also the safe space to develop and thrive. This could be achieved through encouraging refugee students to share their experience through international panels just like this one, which can also create a more inclusive environment and raise awareness about the challenges faced by refugee students from all over the world, from students themselves rather than external agents. Also, since many refugee students reside in marginalized communities, improving refugees' knowledge and access to quality education, again, through scholarships and leadership workshops, is also critical to their integration into the local community and ultimately nurturing this sustainable development that empowers refugees and non-refugee students in the MENA region and Lebanon, but also globally.
Thanks, Rima. That's the other, I think, important aspects when you talk about it. And I think we'll hear more from others when we say, how do we effectively bring that change? Before I say anything, let's also hear from Gentil and how you think we should better integrate refugees into local communities.
Yeah, I think to better integrate refugees into local communities, we should also consider revising our inclusion policies, like to leave, like to come from the tokenism to the reality, because refugees have got quite.
Thank you.
Sorry, someone was, yeah, I think I can go on. Yeah, I was talking about revising the inclusion policies so that we come from the tokenism into the reality, because refugees might have like quite diverse challenges and they should not be generalized when it comes to like to implementing policies. Again, something I want to talk about is somebody talked about it, is this meaningful representation and participation of refugees for better informed decisions and like to be able to come up with appropriate solutions. Because a lot of partners and stakeholders think that like sitting there in a meeting, talk about refugees challenges and try to identify solutions is enough. But to be honest, if you're trying to handle my challenges and I'm not there, you don't know what I really need. And I don't believe that's for me. Yeah, so another point is like, I wish there was a kind of evaluation and feedback mechanism for refugee communities where we could see people being held accountable of their work to be able to impact refugee lives. Again, I would also talk about research-based implemented solutions. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Gentil. And I guess you all are really touch basing on very different aspects of it, right? When we say about meaningful participation, we need to ensure that it's effective, and that's really taking into consideration different needs. The needs of, when we talk about refugees, the needs are quite distinct to non-refugee students, but also I guess within the refugee communities, the needs of young women and girls are different to the needs of people with different sexual orientation, different ethnicities. So it's really important to make sure that we include that diversity in people with disability. So thanks on that. I know, Khatira, you also wanted to come in on this if you have anything to add about local integration.
Yeah, sure. So my points would be like the better integration would be possible if we integrate the students together. That we have so many refugee schools out here. Refugees are going only to refugee schools. But how we are going to integrate and how we are going to make them information about the culture of each other when they are not integrating in the school level, educational level. So my point is that we should better integrate the students in the refugee student and the host community students should study together. That is the best way that they can know about each other's culture and they can remove all the ambiguities and all those prejudice that they have against each other. We know there are a lot of prejudices due to the fake news and misinformation that is being spread all over social media. And I guess that is the best way to integrate the students. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Khatira. Definitely. I think making sure that the teaching environment, right, the learning environment is not isolated. You don't want to be studying something that is not quite relevant with what the society that you live in is facing. I might just pause. I know we have a couple of more questions, but I might pause and see if there are any questions from the audience. Either write your question down in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand and ask your question, we would be happy to take as well. And if they're not, then I might just continue for the rest of the conversation. So I'll wait and see if anybody from the audience has a question. Khatira, while we're waiting, I might ask you one more question. You've talked about education, and I think I also wanted to hear more about what are the best practices that you see for ensuring that refugee education, that the programs that are there for refugees align with their own and the needs of the local communities.
Yeah, so I wanted to speak about this because we have a lot of different certification programs and educational work for refugees by different stakeholders in Pakistan. What I have seen the problem is they have the students have been certified, they have been given certificates and trainings of that field or that kind of education, which is not very compatible with the market, with the job market. Once they have got the certificate, they do not have any career in that career path. So I believe that before starting any kind of educational training or educational certification, there should be a need assessment based. There should be a survey and need assessment to know what kind of educational path is very good at this job market and what is going to be beneficial for both the individual person and for the society as a whole. Like if we talk about here, most refugees are not being provided the jobs in the organization in Pakistan because of the NIC, that the national identity card problem, and there are other issues where the organizations are not providing job for refugees just because of the status of being a refugee. So I believe that we should have that kind of courses or educational program which is more important for online work, for remote work. So that is the kind, like we have so many platforms which are like Upwork and Fiverr and something like that. There should be programs which is a kind of like an education program which will provide them a good education opportunity on working on online platforms, and that can be beneficial for themselves and for the whole community as well. So I believe that before starting any educational program, there should be an assessment based. These kind of certification have no future if you're giving the time, you're giving the money, but there is no future for that kind of certification at all.
Thanks, Khatira. I know we have one question, so I won't comment on anything. Should I see one hands up?
Hi, that's me. Solana here from MIT React. Just loving this discussion and really struck by all of your comments about how these programs and different offerings are designed and where sometimes they miss the mark because communities and youth haven't been meaningfully engaged in the design of those solutions. I would love, just for really anyone here, ideas about how organizations, for example, a place like MIT, can really work with communities to co-design those solutions, or really groups like MIT shouldn't even be involved. I mean, perhaps it really is around community-led, refugee-led solutions, and then how do we organizations like ours help support, raise visibility, amplify those kinds of solutions. So I just love, any thoughts or suggestions. This year's summit is about co-designing, these kinds of pathways, and would love any insight on what does really meaningful engagement design look like that really brings out and honors youth experiences.
Can I go on? Yes, I think I've got just one point that is burning that I wanted to share that. So for me, when it comes to meaningful engagement, I feel like it's all about diversifying, consultations. Because let's say, for example, we've got 6% of refugees who are globally able to go into higher education. But if we come back and consult the research, where are these students from? Maybe they are from, there are those refugees who are maybe based in Europe, maybe 0.0% is a number of people who are refugees in developing countries. So for me, and having this real engagement of people is all about making sure that every single community, every single area is covered. Not just talking about refugees, but are they really covered in terms of their geographical locations, in terms of their physical abilities or disabilities, in terms of their language barriers. Do we work with only people who are able to express themselves? How about engaging the youth who are not able to go to school? How about engaging people living with disabilities? So for me, tackling every single corner of beneficiaries is really key to a meaningful participation and inclusion.
I can see Fadi and then Tara. Fadi, we can't hear you. Maybe we'll go to Dara and then we'll come back to you.
I think sort of the most meaningful thing that you could do is sort of this idea of partnership and ensuring that a lot of these students are treated not as equals and as partners, and their ideas are sort of held with the same importance as value that other people's who might have more degrees or more experience would also be. And I think also, conversations like this that give a lot of students the opportunity to speak and amplify their own voices and be listened to are really, really important. But I think the most important thing that you could do is treat students as people that you can learn from and that also you can teach. I think a lot of times, especially in academic settings, it's sort of taught, it's sort of seen to be that students sit in the classroom and they're just there to absorb knowledge from other people. And often we don't really think to look to students, when we want to hear ideas or we are thinking about ways to improve our communities or our schools or so wherever you're based. So I would say the most important thing you can do is treat those students as partners and treat their ideas with the same importance as anybody else.
But should we try?
Okay, no, talk.
You talk now? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm facing some technical issues. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to address the issue, the idea of like engaging institutions like MIT in like what these institutions can do. I think they can do a great deal because institutions like this are like hubs for expertise and resources and knowledge, and having these resources allows them to be able to contribute very meaningfully because the knowledge production is not produced in vacuum, but it understands the needs of the community and the needs of vulnerable and underrepresented communities like the refugee community. So I think setting in educational institutions agendas, some community and civic engagement objectives and goals to satisfy could play a great deal and could be conducive to creating real and meaningful change. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's also a very interesting conversation, right? The whole co-design idea. It's an important aspect of the work. Different institutions are quite willing to make sure that they co-design. I think maybe one quick note is that to highlight when we think about co-designs, to make sure that there is enough time to absorb the background information that is needed for somebody to be able to effectively partner with your institution. I think a lot of times we would bring people on board, but because that enabling environment is not created, they're not able to really fully effectively give that input or contribution. I can see a lot of questions are coming up. Rama, would you like to open your mic and ask your questions about tips that you said?
I'm not prepared actually, but I have a small question. Like if I have an idea about an initiative, an online one, of course, to guide or help refugees, whether Syrians or in general, in education and taking jobs, whether abroad or in their countries, how to find this audience range? Yani, how can I find people who are interested in my initiative or in the idea that I'm working for? And thank you.
Thanks, Rama. Anybody want to answer that, Rima?
Yeah, so the way it worked out with me is whenever I wanted to start Family Forward, I shared my idea with my colleagues and my friends around me, and they were all very interested. I think an important point in whenever you're trying to formulate an initiative is, for example, consulting the Center of Civic Engagement in your university, if it exists, or talking to a professor that works in the area of the initiative in order to mentor you and support you, perhaps add a perspective from their experience. Also, it's a very important point. And then maybe try to engage in workshops and just like the UNDP in here, UN conferences, and then present your initiatives and seek out leaders from all over the world who are also interested in helping in order to add perspectives from the national but also the international level. It's very easy whenever you decide to start just to advertise for your initiative, and I think you'll have the audience, so many people, so many students from all over the world willing to help.
Thank you so much, Rima, for sharing. Soon, hopefully, I will be doing this.
Great. I can see, Abdullah, you have a question about raising awareness with the host community. Would you like to come and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Would you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, my question is about that as refugees here in Somalia, we have we're in touch with the UNHCR partners, and you can feel that they have deep perspective on refugee circumstances and needs. And other people the host community, like education institutions, sometimes even like hospital things, that people are welcome in and happy to help as guests there in their culture. But still, in some areas, in those areas, like where you're education institutions, hospitals, and especially also government, sometimes you think you understanding your circumstances as a refugee. So I've been thinking and like trying to brainstorming, and I thought this was an opportunity to ask here to get ideas. That's what I mean of awareness. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Abdullah. So if I could summarize your question, you're asking how do we better raise the awareness on the issues that refugees are facing to different institutions and different authorities, stakeholders?
Yes, exactly.
Great. Does anybody want to comment on that? I might just quickly touch base, Abdullah. I think raising awareness, it's such an important aspect, and all we know the power that social media has. One thing I would say before doing anything, it's really, really important that you do your research. So when you're trying to talk about or bring more knowledge about an issue that people are facing, it's really important that we are talking about facts. As usually that's kind of the same issue that brings more challenges. So I think it's really important to make sure what you're promoting is based on facts, and then second, to really find a common ground where you're able to invite someone into sharing the information that you would like. I know when we talk about institutions, the governments, it might seem quite big, but when there is an interest, where there is a bigger group of people that are facing some, similar issues, for example, access to health in a hospital, then that would create a demand or the need for that authority to listen to you. So I think it's really important that you slowly build up that momentum and to be able to really present what is important to you to bring that change. Khatir, I saw your hand up for a moment. Would you want to comment on that?
Yes, so this question that he asked is more relevant to me as well, because I can share an experience of mine. We all know in 2021 there has been a Taliban retake of Afghanistan. It was in July and August 2021. So some of the refugees who are like me, who are living in Pakistan, I have seen our host community were really celebrating the Taliban takeover of Pakistan, some of them, because of some of the misinformation and the fake news that was being spread all over social media, and as well as the social media and the news network. And the news agents were providing this information that the people of Afghanistan are very happy that the Taliban has taken over Afghanistan once again. So after that, a lot of the refugees were facing the bullying from the local community, that why you are not returning to your country when your country is independent once again. So I think that the kind of thing with the local people of any country, the host country, should be provided is to counter the misinformation and the fake news that is always being spread about regarding the refugees. That brings the prejudice among the host country national and the refugees. I know from a personal experience that we have seen people who are celebrating the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, and there has been a lot of hate among both the communities out here, even for the refugees and the host country. There was a critical situation back in 2022 when a lot of refugees were arrested in Pakistan because they were raising their voice against Taliban. So this is the kind of, I guess, this is the thing that I believe that fake news, misinformation, and disinformation in social media brings a lot of prejudice among the refugee community, and there should be a kind of a thing that the government should raise their voice against it. There should be training for the host communities.
Thanks, Satira. Very, very important to make sure that we tackle that misinformation, because a lot of issues that raises even more challenges for the communities. Reith, I can see you have patiently raised your hand for a while. Should we come to you? Reith Lual?
Yes, Arash. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Pleasure. I'm really, really happy, and I've learned a lot from the presenters. And all the panelists have actually exhausted almost everything. And I thank God that we had such a kind of event that deal with the refugees issues. So me, I will have just an additional kind of point on the side of challenges being faced by refugees, and also on the side of the successes that we are witnessing in the refugee level. So currently, as we are speaking, I'm in Kakuma refugee camp, and I'm really privileged to attend such a kind of event, and also to listen from other people's perspective and also their experiences. Yeah, on the side of challenges, one thing that here in Kenya, they publish this book through what we call Kenya Institute of Curriculum Design and Development, which actually published the book that are not sold in any market. But I've never seen such book reaching Kakuma refugee level. So, and you cannot buy them in a bookshop or whichever place you plan to buy. Mostly the libraries that are there to support the education initiatives, they are only furnished with what we call commercial books, but not the approved ones that are actually approved by the Kenyan curriculum design and also development that deal with publishing of books for learning. That's, I think, is a key challenge. In all the institutions that I've taught, either with primary or high school, it's a challenge that we don't get those books that are actually used in public institutions, public primary school and public secondary schools. So if there's a way that such kind of channel can be improved, then it will actually help. Because those that are purely learning in the refugee camp, they only get access to such book from those who got scholarship through like World Bank and UNHCR, and also through Windows International Kenya. When they come with such book from other part of the country now, those who are in the camp could actually get access to them, but not within the institution. And then one of the success that I've seen this year is actually about the World Bank scholarship that was given to many refugees actually. That thing really impressed me the most. And that's a kind of a success that I've never happened before in the refugee camp. So they took a very good number. Actually, almost everyone that was within the time frame that they're asking to support in the camp level. So it's a pleasure to see such a great kind of success. And that's through the help of UNHCR collaborating with actually the World Bank to bring such initiatives to the camp level. So, and I'm seeing a lot of also learning opportunities through SAVIC and also through the DAFI scholarship. They're actually expanding the number of people that are sponsoring, and also through WUSA. So a lot of many kind of progress and success that are actually happening this year on the field of education are actually tremendous. I don't know what to recommend, but anyway, we never cry.
Reith, we've lost your voice. But I'm glad to hear that there has been a lot of positive progress towards accessing opportunities for higher education. I think you also want to ask how we might be able to increase that. Hopefully you would be able to come back and chat. I know we are running out of time, so I might just come back. Alida, would you quickly just ask your question?
Thank you so much, Mr. Arash. I'm happy to be here. That's a nice session. I'd like to ask quickly my question regarding to the, it's a question, but also a recommendation. Where can we classify the people, displaced people who are not refugee holders yet, but are still on the asylum seeker permit, And most of the time I see that they are undermined and they are not included in the higher education process. And even though when they want to pursue their studies in their host community, there are a lot of things that hindering their dream. Like if they want to go to the university, honestly speaking, in South Africa, the country got this system of allowing people, refugee in general, but allowing people to come but not reside in the camp, like freedom, they are free to be integrated in the community, but the policies that the country have been doing, it got some of the trick, like you can't get access to education, to the higher education, and there have been a lot of advocacy with the UNCR, but I would like to address this particularly to you, that you have to overlook about, try to be inclusive, and in terms of allowing also asylum seeker holders to also access to education by mentioning few, like DEFI scholarship that only cover people who has refugee status. And I have been going around, browsing around the many scholarships on the internet, and many only support people who have refugee status. And in South Africa, for myself speaking, I have been, I came here in 2015 with a bachelor degree from my country, Burundi, but I've been want to go back to university, but I couldn't get application be successful. But I was always like be banned to get into the system. So I want to try to ask you to advocate more about also the people who don't have refugee yet and live in the country like for 10 years without a refugee status, but want to go back to to university, but you can't get access to the university so that you can get maybe apply for a scholarship, because you have a scholarship if you are a student. So without being accepted in the university, you can't get the access to those scholarships out there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alida. That's a very, very important issue that you've raised. I think, when it comes into opportunities, it even becomes more limited when we talk about asylum seekers. So it's really, really important to highlight. Definitely, that's something that we are really trying hard to make sure that we increase those pathways. That is not necessarily only for refugees. And I think especially you mentioned with bachelor degrees, sometimes when people would like to continue further, right, study masters, and that becomes even more challenging, especially for people who want to step into academic world. I might not be able to take all the questions here, but if you don't mind putting it in the chat, and hopefully we will be able to get back to you on that. I would like to pose the last questions to all the panelists, and maybe to frame it in a way to say, for advocating better for the rights of refugees or engagement of refugee students, if you have a call to action for all our audiences today, and for those that will join in and listen later virtually, what would you recommend? What is your call to action? Maybe I would start with Jantil.
Oh, thanks so very much. I think my call to action would go with Mikal's question. That's what I wanted to try to comment on. Yeah, where he said, how are international institutions welcoming to refugees, and what is needed from refugees to be filled as well? So I wanted to provide this call for action, to action, like talking about international institutions. I think they might be both welcoming and not welcoming at some point. Like, for example, there are times where they set criteria that discriminate applicants with ages. For example, we all know that refugees might try their chances at any ages. That's what I believe. I believe that whenever I get a chance to try my faith dream, I should be welcomed and supported. So at some point, you see like there are candidates, like we are accepting candidates who are 20 years and below, 25 years and below, and yet that was maybe going to be your life-changing opportunity and you lose that. So I would advocate for age limit criteria to be really revised. And again, the criteria around documentations, where at some point you realize they are very strict around like English proficiency, and we all know these ICELs and TOEFL documents are really, really expensive for refugees, mostly living in developing countries. Like it's very hard for a refugee who doesn't have any kind of work to afford like 100 USD or 300 USD for just a document that he doesn't even believe this will go through. And I believe at some point there is a way for institutions to evaluate applicants' English proficiency without even those documents. So those would be my two highlights. And I think I tried to respond to Mikhail's comment.
Thanks, Chantil. Thanks also for paying attention to that. Let's move on to Fadi.
Hi. So I think the call to action that I would target is to actually address the systematic challenges that hinder refugees from accessing education, because I think any efforts within a system that actually does not allow for refugees to access whether primary, secondary, or higher education, the efforts would be very limited, because we can design programs or projects that could give the skills needed. But if there are systematic challenges that prevent students of refugee backgrounds from accessing these initiatives, then our work will not make any actual change. So I think to advocate and lobby for systematic changes and for changes within the laws themselves in the host communities to actually bring refugees to equal status of members of the host community, so that they're not treated as second-class citizens. Thus, any opportunities they might get would be second-class opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks, Rima. Thanks, Fadi. I appreciate it. I wanted to say, now that you're sitting together, maybe we'll pass it over to Rima.
Yeah, I would also want to focus on challenges. However, apart from the educational side, I would want to speak about the mental health challenges that refugees go through, especially coming from a displaced area. These refugees go through various mental health burdens, and unfortunately, at least refugees in my area where I come from, there is a very little support, psychological support when it comes to these refugees, and there's also the stigma that hinders refugees from reaching out to mental health professionals, seeking out therapy. So I think supporting refugees when it comes to mental health by providing them the safe space to express themselves, their feelings, heal from their previous traumas is an essential step in this process.
Thanks, Rima. These are all really great points for closing our sessions. Dara, over to you.
I think one of the most important things we can do is sort of in tandem work on changing these big systematic problems that are really hard to unpack, and at the same time start enacting real tangible change on the local level. I think the local level is really where you can make the most impact and personally sort of work with the most people and really get some change done. So I would say it's most important to make sure that we're integrating refugee students on the local level, making sure they feel represented and included in their schools, in their communities, making sure they feel like the local government is listening to what they have to say in their policy-making decisions. And I think making sure that their voices are viewed as expert, experienced voices, are viewed as people with really, really good ideas, are viewed as really important stakeholders in our community.
Thanks, Tara. Much appreciated. I think we're summarizing the sessions really well. Last but not least, Khatira, let's end with your call to action.
Yeah, so speaking from my perspective, for past 2 or 3 years, I've been witness to many national, international conferences, forums, and different meetings where the refugee challenges and all the educational and job and other challenges are being discussed, strategized, and planning has been done. So I personally want from all these organizations now that how they are going to call for a real action. It's a time to really take a step ahead and do something for all, because we have already summarized the challenges, we have already planned and strategized. So it is the better time to take an action and really remove all those hurdles and challenges for the refugees. And personally speaking, from my perspective, recently I was invited to as a panelist in ECW High Living Financing Conference in Switzerland. My every thing was prepared, but I was at the last moment I was denied the visa to Switzerland because I had my passport was a manual basis. I could not get an electronic passport due to the current regime in Afghanistan. So that was the only, we refugees are being invited at this decision-making table. But what I feel is you should provide all those opportunities to the refugees to be actually there at the decision-making table. Only being invited with all the hurdles we are facing through, we cannot be on the same table as the others are in the decision-making table. So what I believe that apart from inviting and calling for refugees to stand to be a part of the decision-making table, we should also remove the hurdles that they are facing to be there and actually participate in the decision-making table. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Khatira. Well said. I would like to invite you all to join me in giving a big round of applause to all the wonderful panelists that have taken their time to share their expertise and really all this knowledgeable discussion. Thank you so much, Khatira. Thanks, Fadi. Thanks, Rima. Thanks, Dara. And honestly, really, really appreciate all the efforts that you all have been putting into this, Jantil. It really gives us hope to know that all of you have taken charge, that you're a part of this whole movement in localization, in bringing change in the communities. So salute to all of you. Thanks to all the audience for being patient with us and engaged. And thanks also to the Migration Summit, MIT React, and NAML for their support. I encourage you all to see the rest of the sessions that they have. And I have personally really enjoyed. So from UNHCR and from all of us, thank you for being with us today, and happy Eid to those of you that are celebrating. Have a wonderful day ahead and have a good weekend.